Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As the shutdown enters its 18th day, President Trump's planning to address the nation Tuesday night. That's tonight from the Oval Office. He's also set to visit the border Thursday. Trump requested the primetime broadcast slot of 9 p.m. Eastern, which all major networks agreed to accommodate. Networks are not required to satisfy such requests. In 2014, they declined to air an Obama address on immigration policy. Shortly after Trump's announcement, Democratic congressional leaders released a statement demanding equal television time. The statement read, quote, "If his past statements are any indication, President Trump's address will be full of malice and misinformation," they said. Democratic lawmakers are planning to move ahead with a series of appropriations bills today that would reopen most government agencies, although Trump and the Republicans have not said they would sign on to the measures. This comes as the effects of the government shutdown, now the second longest shutdown in U.S. history, continue to be felt across the country. TSA agents at airports who've been working without pay as essential employees have been calling in sick in record numbers to protest the shutdown, making for long wait times and possible security concerns at airports. Meanwhile, Democratic lawmakers are raising concerns funding for food stamp benefits may run out for the nearly 39 million people who depend on the federal program to eat each month. On Monday, Democratic Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen held a roundtable with federal workers affected by the shutdown. This is Laverne Bird, a union representative from the Census Bureau.
The president doesn't understand that we are human beings. We are people. Federal workers, that's just like, words, federal workers. No, no, no. I am the federal worker. He is the federal worker. We are people. We have bills to pay. We have mortgages to pay. We have food we need to eat to survive, just like everybody else. It's not a game to us. I mean, it seems like it's a game to him. Oh, I'll keep the government shut down for months, for years. Well, what about the 800,000 people? Do you even care? Do you have a heart? It doesn't seem so.
A delegation of Democratic lawmakers visited a U.S. Border Patrol station in New Mexico, where an 8-year-old Guatemalan boy was held before he died last month. New York Congressmember, the now House Judiciary Committee Chair Jerry Nadler, blasted President Trump's recent claims that immigration at the U.S.-Mexico border constitutes a national emergency.
The only emergency at the border is a humanitarian emergency caused by this war on children. The fact of the matter is that the number of apprehensions, the number of migrants crossing the border is way down over the last few years. There's not an emergency of that nature.
Meanwhile, Fox News host Chris Wallace challenged White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders Sunday on her claims that terrorists are entering the country via the southern border.
We know that roughly nearly 4,000 known or suspected terrorists come into our country illegally. And we know that our most vulnerable point of entry is at our southern border.
I know this statistic. I didn't know if you were going to use it, but I studied up on this. Do you know where those 4,000 people come, or where they're captured? Airports.
Not always, but
airports.
Certainly a large number.
The State Department says there hasn't been any terrorists that they found coming across the southern border from Mexico.
It's by air, it's by land, and it's by sea.
That is Chris Wallace of Fox News challenging Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the White House spokesperson. Republican Tennessee Governor Bill Haslam granted full clemency to Toya Brown Monday after she served 15 years in prison and after months of intense public pressure and outrage over her case. Brown was sentenced to life in prison after being convicted of first-degree murder for shooting her rapist as a teenager. She was sexually trafficked, repeatedly abused and drugged. The shooting happened when Brown was just 16 years old, but she was tried as an adult. She is now 30 years old and set to be released in August. In Thailand, a Saudi teenager who says she's fleeing her abusive family has been permitted to temporarily remain in the country. 18-year-old Rahaf Mohammed Al-Kunim landed in Thailand over the weekend on her way to Australia, where she planned to request asylum. Saudi and Thai officials initially said the teenager would be sent back to Kuwait, where her family is. She reportedly had her passport confiscated by Saudi agents before being brought to a guarded hotel room. On Monday, Al-Kunim barricaded herself inside the room, where she chronicled her ordeal on Twitter and demanded to speak with UN refugee agency officials. Al-Kunim left the hotel room later in the day after meeting with UN representatives and receiving assurances she would not be deported. Michael Page of Human Rights Watch said of her case, apparently Saudi authorities not only want to perpetuate systematic discrimination of women at home and prevent Saudi women from freely traveling abroad, but also ensure that those who manage to escape are forced back to a life of abuse, Human Rights Watch. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is in China for a 3-day trip, his 4th visit to the country over the past year. Few details of his trip have been released, but he's expected to hold talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping over trade and the possible upcoming nuclear summit with the United States. Kim's visit comes as U.S. and Chinese officials are holding trade talks in hopes of ending the ongoing trade war between the two countries. In December, President Trump and the Chinese President Xi Jinping agreed to a temporary truce, which is due to expire in March. In Brazil, 300 troops were deployed over the weekend to the northeastern coastal city of Fortaleza after a spate of gang-related violence followed the announcement of new measures related to the management of prisons. The deployment comes in the first week of Jair Bolsonaro's presidency, after the far-right former Army captain campaigned on a pro-military law and order platform. Meanwhile, in Rio de Janeiro, human rights advocates are sounding alarm bells after the new governor, Wilson Witzel, said Thursday city security forces are authorized to shoot to kill suspects. Later on, he said Rio should have its own Guantanamo Bay to house criminals whom he labeled terrorists. The president of the World Bank, Yong Kim, will step down at the end of the month, 3 years before his current term was due to end. The World Bank has been headed by Americans appointed by the U.S. president since its creation in the 1940s. In Canada, armed forces raided native Wet'suwet'en territory in British Columbia Monday, with at least 14 arrests being reported. Land defenders faced off with Royal Canadian Mounted Police as the police breached 2 checkpoints set up to keep pipeline workers out of the protected territory. Indigenous leaders are reportedly being blocked from their territory.
The Wet'suwet'en have won rights and title to their lands.
We did not hurt anyone.
The hereditary chiefs say no. You cannot go through our lands, and under your law, the authority is them.
TransCanada Corporation has been seeking entry into Indigenous territory where they're planning to build the massive $4.7 billion Coastal GasLink pipeline. Land protectors from First Nations clans set up 2 encampments where they had been physically blocking entry to TransCanada workers. On the 8th anniversary of the shooting of former Arizona Congressmember Gabrielle Giffords in Tucson, Democratic lawmakers in Washington are set to introduce new gun control legislation today. The bill will call for universal background checks for private gun sales. However, the legislation will reportedly not address an assault weapons ban. Congressmember Giffords survived the 2011 shooting near Tucson that left 6 people dead and 13 others wounded. She has since become a vocal advocate for gun control and is expected to join House Speaker Nancy Pelosi for an event in D.C. today. The New York Times is reporting Democratic operatives created a fake social media campaign during the 2017 special Senate election in Alabama, pushing for a statewide ban on alcohol in an effort to help get Democrat Doug Jones elected. The Dry Alabama campaign on Facebook and Twitter was designed to look like an initiative from religious supporters of Republican Roy Moore and sought to scare off moderate Republicans who supported him. In December, the New York Times reported a group of Democrats in another cyber scheme admitted to using false flag operations to make it look like Russian bots were helping Roy Moore's campaign. Doug Jones narrowly beat out Moore in the historically conservative state after at least 9 women accused Moore of sexually harassing or assaulting them when they were teenagers. In more news from Alabama, the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute is coming under fire after rescinding a human rights award for civil rights activist and author Angela Davis. They've also canceled the event associated with the prestigious award. The Institute announced in September that Davis, a Birmingham native, would receive the Fred L. Shuttlesworth Award. But on Saturday, they released a statement saying they were withdrawing the award after, quote, supporters and other concerned individuals and organizations, both inside and outside of our local community, began to make requests that we reconsider our decision, unquote. Birmingham Mayor Randall Woodfin said he was dismayed by the Institute's decision, which he said came after, quote, protests from our local Jewish community and some of its allies, unquote. Angela Davis has been a long-time outspoken defender of Palestinian rights and is critical of Israeli government policy. To see our recent hour broadcast with Angela Davis, go to our website at democracynow.org. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg was not on the bench Monday as justices met for the first day of oral arguments of 2019. The 85-year-old, three-time cancer-surviving justice is recuperating after she had 2 malignant tumors removed from her left lung just a few weeks ago. This marks the first time Bader Ginsburg has missed a day of oral argument since she was confirmed to the court over a quarter of a century ago. She'll still be involved in cases by reading the briefs and transcripts of the arguments. In more news from the Supreme Court, justices rejected a bid Monday by ExxonMobil to block Massachusetts from investigating whether the oil giant misled the public and stakeholders about climate change. In response to the news, Massachusetts Attorney General Maura Healey tweeted, "Today's SCOTUS victory clears the way for our office to investigate Exxon's conduct toward consumers and investors. The public deserves answers from this company about what it knew about the impacts of burning fossil fuels and when," she said. In October, New York launched a lawsuit against Exxon for deceiving shareholders over the financial risks of climate change. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.